What if I told you the world's second strongest military walked into a war expecting a quick win and ended up stuck in a nightmare it couldn't escape? That's exactly what happened when Russia launched its invasion of Ukraine. At the time, most experts thought Ukraine didn't stand a chance. How could a country with a fraction of the manpower and equipment go head-to-head with a global superpower? Well, Ukraine didn't just hold its ground, it flipped the script. The underdog became the star of the show, pulling off moves that left Russia reeling and the world watching in awe. From bold strategies to cutting-edge tech and unbreakable willpower, Ukraine has shown the kind of resilience that rewrites history. So, how did they do it? Let's break down how Ukraine not only survived, but managed to deal blows that could ruin Russia's future forever. When Russia rolled its tanks across Ukraine's border in February 2022, the plan seemed simple: overwhelm the smaller neighbor with sheer size and firepower. At the time, Russia's military was thought to be nearly invincible. It had over 900,000 active soldiers, a massive fleet of tanks, aircraft, and advanced weapons, and a reputation for being one of the toughest armies in the world. Ukraine? It had just under 200,000 soldiers and far fewer resources. On paper, it was like David going up against Goliath. But here's where things get interesting. Ukraine didn't crumble. Instead, it fought back with ferocity that Russia never expected. Their lightning strike strategy, storming the city, capturing its leaders, and ending the war in a matter of weeks, turned into a logistical disaster. Ukrainian forces, trained by NATO since 2014, knew exactly how to counter Russia's moves. And let's not forget the morale factor. Ukrainians had everything to lose, and they fought like it. In contrast, many Russian troops didn't even know why they were fighting. Add to that poor planning, stretched supply lines, and stiff resistance, and suddenly Russia's unstoppable invasion looked anything but. The war was no longer a quick operation. It was becoming a grinding, painful quagmire for the invaders. Quick pause. Help me hit 10,000 subs by subscribing and liking this video. Back to it. Russia's invasion of Ukraine quickly became a masterclass in what not to do during a war, leaving the world scratching its head and Ukraine exploiting every mistake. First, let's talk about the disastrous Hostomel airport operation. Russia aimed to storm the airport near Kiev with elite troops and turn it into a gateway for reinforcements. The plan? A bold helicopter assault, quickly secure the runway, and flood the area with thousands of troops. Sounds efficient, right? Except Ukrainian forces had other plans. Ukrainian soldiers downed several Russian aircraft, shelled the runway, and delayed the operation long enough to bring in reinforcements of their own. Russia's big opening move was a flop. Then there were the infamous military convoys, endless lines of tanks and supply trucks crawling through Ukraine like sitting ducks. Instead of advancing in smaller, flexible units, Russian forces moved in long, vulnerable columns. When Ukrainian defenders took out the lead and rear vehicles, the entire convoy was trapped, becoming an easy target for artillery and drones. One convoy of 100 vehicles was decimated this way, a logistical nightmare for Russia. And let's not forget the tanks. Russian battle tanks, like the T-80 and T-90, are fast and agile but have a glaring weakness: poorly protected ammunition. Ukrainian forces, armed with NATO-supplied Javelin and NLAW anti-tank missiles, exploited this design flaw over and over. Russian tanks became death traps, with their turrets blown clean off in what's now infamously called the jack-in-the-box effect. The cherry on top of all these blunders? Russia tried to invade Ukraine the same way it took Crimea in 2014, with speed and psychological tactics. But Ukraine had learned from the past. Its military was prepared for Russia's moves, and with NATO training under its belt, it countered effectively. From underestimating Ukraine's resolve to overestimating its own capabilities, Russia's early failures set the stage for a war that dragged on much longer and cost far more than anyone in Moscow had planned. When Ukraine stood its ground in those early weeks, the world took notice, and NATO stepped up in a big way. Ukraine's survival wasn't just about bravery, it was also about the right equipment, training, and intelligence, much of which came from NATO allies. After Russia's annexation of Crimea in 2014, NATO began working closely with Ukraine to modernize its military. This included advanced training for Ukrainian soldiers and shipments of critical gear, like the Javelin anti-tank missiles. These weren't just any missiles, they were game changers. Designed to strike from above, where tank armor is weakest, the Javelins became a nightmare for Russian armor. In one battle after another, Ukrainian troops used them to shred Russian tanks that were once seen as unstoppable. As the war progressed, the aid ramped up. Countries like Poland, the UK, and the US sent overhauled tanks, artillery systems, and ammunition. NATO provided real-time satellite data, giving Ukraine a clear picture of Russian troop movements. This allowed Ukraine to anticipate attacks, prepare defenses, and even launch counteroffensives. One standout piece of equipment was the French Caesar howitzer, an advanced artillery system that combined precision, mobility, and range. Ukrainian forces used these to devastating effect, hitting Russian targets from a safe distance and moving before counterattacks could land. With every new shipment of weapons, Ukraine got stronger, while Russia struggled to adapt. NATO's backing turned the tide of the war, transforming Ukraine into a force capable of going on the offensive. While NATO's support gave Ukraine a critical edge, the real magic came from Ukraine's own ingenuity. Faced with a larger, better-equipped enemy, Ukraine turned to innovative tactics and technology that changed the game and made Russia look clumsy and outdated. Small, off-the-shelf drones were modified to carry grenades, anti-tank mines, and cameras for reconnaissance. These flying machines were cheap, fast, and incredibly effective. Russia, on the other hand, struggled to counter them, often resorting to expensive anti-air missiles to take out drones worth only a few $1,000s. Then there were the sea drones. Ukraine developed and deployed kamikaze drones capable of targeting Russian ships. This innovation was a major factor in breaking Russia's blockade of Ukrainian ports. By hitting ships and supply points in Crimea, Ukraine forced the Russian Black Sea Fleet to retreat, reopening critical trade routes. This was a double victory. It weakened Russia's naval dominance and revitalized Ukraine's economy by restoring its grain exports. Ukrainian forces used NATO's advanced artillery and weapons with a modern warfare mindset. Hit hard, move fast. Systems like the French Caesar howitzers and US-provided HIMARS allowed Ukraine to stay agile, striking from long range and redeploying before Russia could respond. This shoot-and-scoot strategy kept Russian forces constantly off balance. While battles were fought on the ground, an equally important war was raging in the economy, and Ukraine managed to outmaneuver Russia here too. Thanks to unprecedented financial and military support from NATO and its allies, Ukraine's economy stayed afloat even as it faced massive destruction. Over $240 billion in aid flowed into the country, funding military operations, humanitarian efforts, and even rebuilding efforts in war-torn regions. In contrast, Russia faced crippling sanctions. Cut off from global markets and technology, its economy began to shrink, with foreign investments vanishing overnight. Military spending skyrocketed, draining resources and worsening public discontent. Meanwhile, Ukraine embraced cost-effective strategies like mass-producing drones, which proved far cheaper and more effective than Russia's outdated, expensive hardware. As the war dragged on, the economic disparity between the two nations became clear. Ukraine, backed by its allies, was thriving under pressure, while Russia was buckling under the weight of its own war. Ukraine's resilience, innovation, and strategic brilliance have done more than just repel a larger invader. They've shown the world what true determination looks like. Russia's future, once built on military dominance, now lies in question. The underdog has become the victor, rewriting the rules of modern warfare. If you enjoyed this breakdown, don't forget to like, subscribe, and drop your thoughts in the comments below. There's more to uncover about this conflict, so stick around for our next deep dive.